everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Speak Plainly podcast, where we speak plainly about things that matter. I am your host, Owl Medicine, and today's topic is going to be all about regulation. Self-regulation, co-regulation, what regulation is, how we can conceptualize what self-regulation and co-regulation do for us individually and as a society. We're going to look at a little bit of how it came about, evolution, and what we need to really know and change in order for regulation to be a useful term, concept, and event in our lives. So, the first thing I need to say about regulation is most of this conversation today is going to be about self-regulation. But I need to say right up front, I believe self-regulation to be a band-aid for the most part. I feel like self-regulation, and I've said this in previous podcasts, is similar to my job as an EMT, where my job was not to save your life. As an EMT, when you're doing an ambulance run, your job is to keep them alive until they can get to a hospital where they have more tools to help. I feel like that's what self-regulation is for. The reason self-regulation, or the reason I believe that rather, is because when we're born, we're not able to self-regulate. In fact, the first thing that we do when we're born is cry for help. And since pretty much every mammal is born with their most base important survival instinct intact. Horses can get up and run, and giraffes with their crazy legs can stand up and walk, and within a very, very short amount of time of birth, we immediately ask for help. We can't get our own food. We can't make our own food from sunlight like plants do. So we have to have help. Physical, real, actual help from a caregiver. We are not capable of regulating our own body temperature, right? Now, we're talking about regulation in a general sense. When I say regulation, I'm talking about regulation of your central nervous system, regulation of the autonomic nervous system, which is, I understand, can sound a little weird. Autonomic is like your automatic nervous system. Isn't that already regulated? Yeah, it is. But your body is hardwired for survival, not for anything better. I think you know that being in survival mode is just less enjoyable than anything else. So yes, we are already built and designed in a certain way with certain predications just to survive as biological mechanisms to keep us alive, because that's what biology does. It just wants to repeat. It wants to make itself over and over again. That's what we want to do. We want to make babies. And we need another person to do that. That's why co-regulation. So I just wanted to make that really clear first. Co-regulation, to me, is a primary dynamic in the human species. We are meant to co-regulate with each other. I also think this is why, if you look at the most successful people in America and in the world, most of them got their partners early on in life, and they stuck with that partner for the rest of their life, or career at least. And the reason, I don't think that married people are smarter or better or harder working or anything of the sort. I think that married people just have someone that they have chosen as their person to help them regulate. I think it's literally that simple. Married people have somebody that helps them regulate their emotions after an event of some sort, any sort, whether that's great or bad or stressful or whatever. A person in a dedicated romantic relationship has someone to report all of these things to make sense of their own internal world by externalizing it to somebody who cares. That's what regulation is for. And we do that automatically with other people. As children, we learn how to regulate ourselves from our parents. So if you suck at regulating yourself, if you suck at self-regulation, like you're just bad at it, when you start to feel some type of way, you just automatically magnify that and make it more important and do more of that. That's probably because that's exactly what you learned from your parents. That's what you learned from your mother. That's what you learned from your father. I know I did. The way that my mother handled things was to just do more work. So guess what I do? I just do more work. I'm a little bit more self-aware, at least I like to think of myself that way. So I try to I don't even just try. I do take time where I purposely, I'm just going to do nothing. I'm just going to chill. And this time is my specific chunk of couple of hours, 4 hours, or an entire evening, or sometimes a whole day, where I'm I just need to really just down-regulate, not numb out, but just really do the minimum possible that I need to do that day. I'll just eat nut butter sandwiches and just really try to let my body down regulate so I can have the energy to show up to do what I need to do, because self-regulation is hard, because I didn't learn it from my parents. They don't know how to regulate themselves. My father is a narcissist who uses religion to hide everything, and my mother has just never stopped working long enough to figure out what else is going on inside her. She doesn't have time, and that's a lot of that is because of the life that she's had, the children that she's raised, and just being a mom. Life's different for her than it is for me. But she is where I would have learned regulation were I to have learned it. So, up front, co-regulation is the gold standard, I think, for the human species, right? So I really want to make that very, 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 very clear. The best way to regulate oneself is with someone else. It's to call somebody that you know, that you love, that understands you, that is able to drop in to kind of feel what you're feeling and give you some kind of outside perspective other than the one that's happening inside your own body. Now that is both attunement, them dropping in to see how you're feeling and to feel what you're feeling. That's empathy, and that is attunement. But it's also some sympathy, because rather than imagining what it's like to be you, they are offering an outside piece of advice from their own perspectives. So that's wonderful, and that's great, and that is co-regulation. It's magical and marvelous, but many of us don't have that ability. We don't have somebody to reach out to help co-regulate us. And for those people who do, a lot of us can't actually depend on our partners for that. They're emotionally stunted, or they're numb, or they've blocked out their own reality. So we can't actually come to the other person, even our romantic people, very often, to help us regulate. And if we can't, what are we going to do? If the gold standard is co-regulation, then the next best is self-regulation. And self-regulation is meant, in my mind, to be a band-aid until we can get to somebody, and for major disruptions, right? Because you can be slightly dysregulated and bring yourself back to center just by taking a few deep breaths and being all right, calm down, it's okay. And that's you get a little dysregulated and you can bring yourself back. But once you get outside of this zone of resiliency, which is this wonderful concept from this wonderful book called Trauma in Chinese Medicine. And the zone of resiliency is essentially this zone that we all oscillate in of ups and downs, and happiness and sadness, of high functioning and low functioning. And we oscillate back and forth, and that is balance. We have a balance of sleep and a balance of wakefulness, and that balance comes over time, like sleeping and being awake and actually doing stuff. And that cycle of up and down is our zone of resiliency. And if we are able to pull ourselves back into a appropriate cycle, if we stay within this realm of resiliency, or this zone of resiliency. If we get knocked outside of that zone of resiliency, we need external help, whether it's a YouTube video, a therapist, a friend, or drugs. whatever it is, all of us have these things outside of ourselves that we use automatically, consciously or subconsciously, to knock us back into this zone of resiliency, this area in which we can handle whatever dysregulation that we have, and we can always fall right back into our own rhythm. With self-regulation, it's really important to understand that this is not meant to be everything. This is extremely difficult. Self-regulation is very, very difficult, especially because most of the way that we regulate ourselves in co-regulation is that the person that is helping co-regulate me, say if I am dysregulated, that person I can see that they're experiencing some level of the same thing that I am experiencing. They're picking up what I'm putting down, and they're providing me with a perspective outside of my own that gives me another narrative to try on to see, does this narrative work? Do I have to be... Can there be or is there another narrative that I can choose that will allow me to understand the reality of the situation as well as my place in it? That perspective shift is a big part of what helps regulate us, at least cognitively. I think there is, not even I think, we know that there is a level of regulation that is happening physiologically that is not a conscious one, which is why getting a bunch of like combat veterans into a room together and having them talk about their experiences typically makes things worse. But if you just get them in a room together and they don't talk about any of their wartime experiences, all of their PTSD symptoms get better, because there is an improvement to our physiology and to the way that our body functions when we believe that somebody else can understand our story. So regulation is very, very intricately tied with story, with the story that we are telling ourselves, that we're living, that we walk away from a situation from. So when we try to self-regulate, we wind up trying to do that with a story, because that's essentially that's how we consciously co-regulate. But the unconscious aspect of that co-regulation is purely physiological. So when we self-regulate, that's the piece that we need to really glom on to. We have to start with the physiological. When we co-regulate, we do that partially subconsciously through physiological mirroring, and we do it consciously through perspective shifting, perspective taking, and reality checking. As an individual, our narratives come from our minds. Our narratives come from our brain and are based off of all of our previous expectations. They're based off of our current expectations from previous experiences. So the narrative is kind of created automatically and is conscious and is mental. It's logical, it's rational. There are pieces are pulled from our memories and then they get put together in a rational way. By rational, I mean like ordered by the prefrontal cortex. So basically you're using your mind to overcome your mind, and that's an uphill battle. It can be done, but it's very much an uphill battle. So one of the things I want to make very, very clear today about self-regulation is when you call somebody, you can co-regulate through changing of a narrative. But you can't do that with self-regulation. You have to start with the body, the physical body. Telling yourself not to feel some type of way or giving yourself another perspective, it's really hard to believe because you know that perspective came from you. Even if you write it down and reread it to yourself, that can help, but you know that narrative was still just from inside of you and therefore is subjective and can be distrusted and will be distrusted. Just doesn't work as well as we hear it from somebody else. So when we when we self-regulate, we have to do it physiologically. So what does that mean? Well, that means the body. That means the physical body. We can self-regulate through touch. We self-regulate through massage. We can self-regulate through exercise, through movement. These are all ways that we regulate across the board. Every single kind of mental health, everything that people suffer from, the most beneficial thing that a person can do is to exercise. It's to move their body. Because physically is how we self-regulate. Physiologically is how we self-regulate. We co-regulate through narrative, perspective taking, and stories. But we self-regulate physiologically because it's our minds that are creating our reality, and then that gets reflected in our bodies. And if we want to feedback to change what's happening in our mind, that feedback needs to happen physiologically if we're going to make it easy for ourselves. Like I said, you can try to do that uphill battle, and sometimes you'll win, but 80% of the time you won't. And then you'll just think that you're weak. So don't do that. Physiologically is the only way that we can really, truly self-regulate. So doing any kind of physical activity that is truly enjoyable, surfing, bike riding, like anything like that, acro yoga, handstands, yoga, anything that gets your body moving consciously where you're aware of your body in space is going to be helpful in regulating yourself. So one of the reasons I'm doing this podcast today is because yesterday I announced a webinar on self-regulation. I want to teach people how to regulate themselves. I also want you to know that self-regulation comes second behind co-regulation as far as like what our body responds to most easily and quickly. But self-regulation is all we really have to count on because all we have is ourselves. There will be times when you don't have a friend to call. There will be times when you don't have internet and you can't look up your favorite guru. There will be times when you're going to have to do this stuff on your own for yourself. And we all know how bad we screw up when we get really dysregulated. We really screw things up. A little thing will mess us up and then we'll get dysregulated by it, deeply dysregulated, especially if we fall into shame about something. That becomes extremely dysregulating. And when we're in shame, we just make things worse. We just make everything that we do worse for ourselves. It's really not a fun trip. So we avoid that by involving ourselves in our physical body. This is really difficult because since we were children, we have been trained to ignore our physical body. There's no way. Like anyone who has taught elementary school children and kindergartners knows how it's like almost impossible to keep them in a chair for 8 hours a day because we weren't designed for that. We're designed to basically be in perpetual motion, but we have learned over time to ignore the physiological realities, desires, needs, and states of our body for sitting in a classroom. We've learned to ignore our entire physiological reality and replace it with a cognitive one just from conditioning, from having to sit for so long. Your lower back and your legs, you just get really disconnected from them. Where there's a term, gluteal amnesia, right? Where you can't really feel your butt, you can't feel your legs. You're not nearly as aware of those as you are, say, like your collarbones or your fingers, where we're doing a lot of this like forward movement where things are coming and getting squished in front. So there's movement around our collarbones and there's movement in our hands. So we are aware of those things in space. That's called proprioception. We're aware of those things, but we don't have proprioception for our thighs and butts. Not as well, not most people. We're not as good at telling what's happening with those parts of our body because we've been trained out of it. So that is another reason that it's difficult to self-regulate because we've disconnected ourselves from our body. And in doing so, we have discounted the importance of our physical body. But that's the only place that we have to regulate from. What is dysregulated is not your mind, it's your physical body. Your physical body and brain together are what make up your mind. Like, Like, that's literally the pieces of your mind. That is the hardware that gives rise to the emergent property of a conscious mind. So if you want to change how you're feeling and you want to become regulated again, because we're not thinking when we're dysregulated. We can't. Because when we're dysregulated, our emotions are stirred up, a stress response is stirred up, and if that stress is high enough, it causes the conversation between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex to go from a one-way or from a two-way to a one-way street. And the amygdala is a lot louder because he's trying to save your life, and the prefrontal cortex is just curious. He's just trying to figure shit out. But your amygdala is trying to save your goddamn life. He's not playing around. For him, it's been life or death for millions of years. Across mammal species, and probably others, the amygdala threat response center has been saving our lives. And prefrontal cortex is just a curious dude. He's just a curious cat. So when it comes to the biological explanation, and I love this because it's biological, like physical life on this planet has its own form of logic. That's what I love. That's what I hear every time I think about or see the word biological. It's like, yes, that's the study of life, ology, bio. But the life that we're talking about is life on this physical planet, in physical space. So it's the physical biology has its own logic, its own rationale, its own reason, and its own like suppositions to how things work. Its own expectations created by previous experiences of individuals that eventually made its way into the epigenetics and into the genetics. So what can a person do when we get really, really dysregulated? And there's nobody to call. You can't phone a friend. You don't have a partner to come home to. What do? When you get so stressed out, you can't think, you want to cry, you want to scream, you want to punch, you want to vomit, you want to do all the things simultaneously, totally overwhelmed in an utterly dysregulated state. What do? Do you have an answer? My guess is you don't. You don't have an easy one. You could think about it and pop a few out. You probably have some suggestions, but you don't actually have an answer. Because most of us don't actually regulate ourselves this way. I have an answer for you, though. I announced this webinar that will be happening on my birthday, and I'm going to be walking people through exactly what to do when we are dysregulated. All right, so and I don't want to just tell people what to do. I want it to make a difference. So that's why this webinar is only going to be 40 minutes on my birthday, because I like working on my birthday. I like sharing information with my friends. There's nothing I'd rather like to do, and I felt weird about doing it anyway. So I was like, my birthday's a perfect time. So I'm going to do it on my birthday, December 7th at 12, from 12 to 12:40. We will be done no later than 12:45, because I also want to honor transition time and people have shit to do. And it's a Wednesday. Within that 40 minutes, we're going to hop on a call, watch some videos that are highly dysregulating, like pick the stuff that pisses you off the most. I will be watching police brutality, because that's what absolutely makes me want to just burn things to the ground. And once we're really dysregulated, we're going to go through a physiological regulation protocol. A really, really simple one. You've heard me talk about it before on this podcast, but it's progressive muscle relaxation. I have two primary ways that I self-regulate, and they are progressive muscle relaxation and yoga nidra. The reason I have two, and only two, and I don't think that you need any more, is because the more options that you have, the more you have to think. And thinking is an inefficient use of energy. So when we are dysregulated, it's like we can't like gather our chi to do what we need to do. So training ourselves to do things the most efficiently is a really useful thing, because it'll take over for us. It'll happen automatically because we've retrained our brains and body to do something that takes the least amount of effort. So in this, we're going to watch police brutality videos, child trafficking videos, like that sort of thing for 5 minutes, get really dysregulated, and watch progressive muscle relaxation. Because when you go to self-regulate and you are powerfully dysregulated, you need an equally powerful form of physiological regulation. So if you're screaming angry and you really want to go fight something, then you could go to a kickboxing gym and get things out that way. That will bring you down to a level that is functional for you. But most of us aren't kickboxers. So if you're in a very, very agitated, violent state, maybe something like kickboxing will work better. But this is why I do progressive muscle relaxation, is because it's an opportunity for a really wide scope of self-regulation. So progressive muscle relaxation is basically where you start from one end of the body and you work your way up or down and then across, and you go from like your fingers and toes to your head, and you're clenching all of the muscles, one small group at a time. Like you clench your hands and you clench your forearms and your upper arms and your shoulders and your neck and your face and your head, and you clench those parts of your body, and then you relax them out all the way. Now, the reason that we're doing this is because what's happening in your mind is a result of your physiological state, because it is both your brain and your body that simultaneously give rise to this emergent phenomenon we call the mind, or the conscious mind. So, by squeezing and relaxing your physical body, the tension that has been created in your body from the dysregulation has a chance to complete. Because what's happened is you're stressed, you are poised to do a stress response, but you're in an incomplete stress response. You can't actually act on it, because you can't attack the thing and you can't run away from the thing, and freezing the thing means you're still here because the thing is just in your head. Whatever it is, we all experience it internally. So we have to get it out of our head, and to do that, we have to get it out of our body. So we squeeze these muscles and then we relax them, and then you move to the next muscle and you squeeze that muscle, and then you relax that one. And you move to the next one, and you squeeze that one, and you relax that one. And you do this all in a very mindful, chilled out kind of way. And that's step one. That's the first and primary self-regulation technique I will be teaching on the 7th. The reason I'm doing the workshop is because I can tell you about this, and this is great, and the next time you get dysregulated, you can go YouTube a yoga nidra, and I highly, highly, highly suggest that you do that. But most people aren't. We just don't, because we discount the power that it actually has. But I have been powerfully dysregulated and just decided that there was a month where anytime I got dysregulated, I was going to try this progressive muscle relaxation thing. And my God, it's awesome. Like, no matter how angry or frustrated or dysregulated I am, by the time I finish a progressive muscle relaxation, I'm pretty darn good. If it's really, really bad, then I'll do a yoga nidra afterward. And so this is part 2. I said you need a type of self-regulation that matches your level of dysregulation. If somebody punched you in the face, that's a different level of dysregulation than spilling a cup of milk, right? Like, one of them will probably, depending on the person, who knows which one would be worse, but one will be worse, one will be less bad, and you need a self-regulation technique for each of them. Progressive muscle relaxation, because of its active component of the muscle squeezing, it brings me to a much more calm and regulated state from a much higher state, because I am squeezing to match the level of intensity that I have. So the more dysregulated you are, the more you're going to squeeze during PMR. Once we finish with the PMR, we'll have a little conversation, we'll talk about some stuff, and then we're going to move to a yoga nidra. Yoga nidra is similar to PMR, but instead of squeezing and relaxing, you're just visualizing, and you're visualizing light coming down and in, and you're making sure there's no tension. You're checking it for tension. You're envisioning light going through and bringing suppleness, and there's lots of variations. But essentially, you're doing the same thing. It's another mindful body scan. Like I said, your brain and your body give rise to your mind. So if you want your mind to be calm, you need to create a calm state in the body. That's how we self-regulate. To self-regulate, you must have a calm state in your body. You must be able to move your body from an uncalm state to a calm state, because only then are you going to be able to think clearly. Only then are you going to be able to actually respond appropriately to the situation. And that's all that we're trying to do. Those of us that believe that we're broken or think we're broken, the reason that we do is because we habitually respond inappropriately for the environment. By learning to regulate yourself, you will respond appropriately to the environment. This is so fundamental because I don't care what your problem is. We all got problems. We all got addictions. If you're not addicted to pharmaceuticals or marijuana or your antidepressant meds or your alcohol or your cigarettes, you're addicted to something. You're addicted to TikTok or doom scrolling. We all are. And the reason is because when we get dysregulated, all we want to do is make the physiological state that we're in more pleasant. That's all we're trying to do. We're trying to make our dysregulated state more pleasant. That's it. We can make it feel better with weed. We can loosen everything with alcohol. We can numb it out with television and doom scrolling. There's lots of ways that we can deal with the dysregulation. We can have disordered eating. But the fundamental problem with every single addiction is central nervous system dysregulation. Period. That is the fundamental problem. That is where we, as addicts, people, livers of life, that's where the rubber meets the road for us. Autonomic dysregulation. If we can figure out when we get dysregulated and how to regulate ourselves again, suddenly we're not addicts anymore. We'll still have to stay sober from the things that we fell into the hardest, because that habit will still be there psychologically. But the fundamental issue that triggered every single one of our compulsions and our relapses is the same. It's dysregulation. Either we're so sad or we're so happy that we think one more time won't hurt, and we fall down that rabbit hole again. So I don't care if it's disordered eating, or if it's doom scrolling, or if it's heroin, if it's crack cocaine, if it's meth, if it's going to the gym, if it's masturbating. I don't care how you cope with your dysregulation. You just need to understand that all of those ways are ways to deal with dysregulation. And if we can learn to regulate, then the stick that we use doesn't matter, because we're regulated. We won't have to worry about replacing one addiction with another. Our addiction will become, as soon as we get dysregulated, we habituate trying to regulate ourselves. Here's a fundamental issue, though, for chronic stress adapted people. It's less fun. It's less fun. Being well regulated is boring. So you're going to have to actually decide, is being well regulated and boring what feels like boring for a person whose entire life, like, there's just this tension that is constantly driving me to do stuff, say stuff, think stuff, act on things. That tension and that pressure, we've come to enjoy. I have. I love that shit. Got to find a balance of it, because I like that tension. I like it in me. I like what I do with it. I even like the feeling of it. But it's so close. Just my baseline state is so close to like hypomanic anyway, which is like just below true mania, that I can get thrown into like a hyper-stimulated dysregulation fairly easily. And then I have to downregulate myself. A last thing to think about is, in our dysregulation, when we regulate ourselves, how far down do you want to go? And I think this is really important when it comes to sticking to it, right? When it comes to compliance with our own regulation, I think about the diabetic patients and things at the clinic I worked at. The hardest thing about medicine isn't medicine quite often. It's compliance. It's getting people to actually do and stick to the things that we know are going to work for them. And that's the same whether it's Western medicine or Eastern medicine or astrology or coaching, or it doesn't matter. It's always the same. The hardest part is the variability of people. And part of the variability of people is our regulation and our dysregulation. And when we go from being dysregulated on a regular basis and finding ways to kind of function well anyway, regulation feels really, really boring. And that's really tough, because then we've got a hard path in front of us there, because then it's, do I enjoy just like being me and having this life, or do I be more adult, more responsible, and regulate? And it sucks, because it feels like it's pitting like who I should be, this well-regulated person, versus who I am. In a way that sucks, because it feels like, well, I'm not enough. I'm not enough the way that I am. So it's all very hard. I mean, it's very simple, but there's a lot of shifting of other parts that has to happen. And that's the only reason it's actually hard. The process of self-regulating isn't that difficult, so long as you understand that you have to do it physiologically. That if your mind's feeling twisted, it's because your body is feeling twisted. And if you want to straighten out your mind, straighten out your body. Because using a twisted mind to straighten out a twisted mind is just not going to be helpful. That's the blind leading the blind. We have to start with the body. So anytime that you self-regulate, you gotta start with the body and then work your way up. It will automatically work its way up. So I'm going to be teaching this webinar on the 7th of December at 12 noon Pacific Standard Time, where I'm just going to be walking you through a very dysregulating experience, and then through progressive muscle relaxation, followed by essentially a yoga nidra. The reason I'm going to be doing all of this, and I will be purposefully dysregulating you, is because no words are going to convince you how profound this is, because you'd call me a liar, and I can't blame you. I really can't blame you, because until you experience it for yourself, you're not going to believe it, and that's totally fine. So I hope that y'all will sign up and become a Patreon supporter of Rethinking Broken. This is an extension of Rethinking Broken. It's a Rethinking Broken webinar. Think about becoming a Patreon supporter, and then you will get this free webinar where you can learn to self-regulate. You can learn to self-regulate when you are profoundly dysregulated, which is an incredible, incredible gift. Imagine how much time you will have if you're no longer having to battle your own emotions. How much could you get done if you weren't fighting your own internal states? How much more could you get done, and how much more of life could you enjoy if you weren't having to climb your way up that self-regulation mountain, constantly telling yourself one thing while feeling another, just so you can drag out the next thing on your to-do list and put a check next to it? Just imagine how awesome that would be, to be able to have so much free time. Because I have gotten way more free time than I'm comfortable with by doing this. Because now I schedule it regularly in my day, and anytime I start to get dysregulated, whether it's from a phone call conversation or some piece of news or whatever, I can just go boop and drop immediately into my PMR or my yoga nidra, and I'm good. Because I know that all I need to do when my brain starts to feel twisted is to straighten out my body. Just run an iron over my body, and I can do that with progressive muscle relaxation if those wrinkles are huge, or I can do it with a little bit of yoga nidra if the wrinkles are small. There's other things you can do, yoga and all that other stuff too as well, and those are great. But those are regular habits, I think, that help maintain regulation. What I'm talking about is not about building a life in which you can maintain regulation. I'm here today talking to you about acute fixes for dysregulation. When you are actually actively dysregulated and you're feeling crazy, you can't figure out your head from a hole in the ground, what do? You start physiologically. The response is always physical. Anytime your brain starts to feel twisted, go to the body, address the body, make the body feel good, and your brain will follow. There is no other way that it can be. Mental focus follows visual focus, and mental acuity follows physical peace. If you want to be able to think clearly, bring your body, your physical body, into a state of peace and comfort. That's how you're going to do it. That's how you're going to regulate. So, join me on December 7th, 12 Pacific Standard Time, and you can do that by becoming a member of the Rethinking Broken Patreon, and you can just go to patreon.com/rethinkingbroken, and you'll see me, Owl Medicine, as the author. And you can join. There's 2 different tiers you can join. Join any of them. And I'd love to see you there. Thank you very much for your time. Regulation is a very real thing. No matter what you struggle with, if you can learn to regulate yourself, you don't need to worry about your addiction anymore. Whether that's doom scrolling or codependency or stonewalling people, internet shopping, or dysregulated eating. You learn to regulate yourself when nobody else is around. If you have that power, you have all the power. So join me December 7th, and we're going to have a great time. Let me teach you this incredible superpower. Thank you guys for joining me. I really love this. I really love my followers. You guys are awesome. And I've been talking about comments. I've been trying to figure out how to get comments available, but apparently they're not available unless you leave a review. And reviews are basically comments. So if you want to leave me a review on wherever you listen to this, Apple, iTunes, Spotify, that would be great. If you have any questions, email me at speakplainlypodcast@gmail.com, and I will get right back to you. Thank you guys so much. You're awesome. And remember, stay curious and stay uncomfortable.